Welcome to BattleBots, the game where the rules are made up and the points apparently don't matter.
If you don't know what he's talking about, you better go back and watch this episode of BattleBots before you continue watching this show. We're about to discuss some major spoilers.
This week we're going to hear from Jackpot's captain, Jeff Waters, and veteran robot builder Victor Soto about his stuff that happened, and our very own Will Bales from Hypershock about his season debut.
I'm Will Bales from Hypershock.
We're Mike and Andrea Galately from Team Witch Doctor.
And this is the Tale of the Tape after show. I know you're dying to get to the part where we complain about that judge's decision, so let's jump right into that 30-second recap.
30 seconds on the clock! This week we saw Gigabyte's NSFW fight where they wound up topless again. Sub-Zero lost to Jackpot, who spun to win and got lucky. Uppercut makes like NASA and launches Gemini into orbit twice. And Beta avoids using its weapon entirely and wedges its way to a win.
In the pit segment, Will riles up the villagers with pitchforks. Tantrum got tuckered out from swinging his fist around. Big Dill and Adam94 got stuck in a loving embrace. And our very own Hypershock starts off the season strong, doing Hypershock things.
It's par for the course.
Let's start tonight's deep dives with newcomer Jackpot. Jackpot is a team that actually split off of Malice at the last minute, so their whole robot was built in record time. Let's hear directly from Jeff Waters on what Jackpot is all about.
I really enjoyed my time over at Malice. Malice was a great team, and you see all their first fight, it went great. But Bunny, David were good people to work with, even Isaac. But there's no bad blood between us. I ended up making Jackpot on a whim after we were moving our insect arena with Shay and Robert from Shay's house to Robert's house after we ran a invite-only event. And we said, hey, let's build a heavyweight. And lo and behold, 4 weeks later, we had that. And we were at BattleBots with Jackpot. Malice was a great team to be with. I would have stuck with them if it wasn't for the delay, but that delay opened up a lot of opportunity for new robots, and that was mostly what influenced our decision to create Jackpot. So Jackpot was built in about 4 weeks or so, with the help of me, Robert, Shay, and Chris for the last 2 weeks when he drove in from Colorado in that big old converted bus he had. The entirety cost of Jackpot was under $10K without sponsors for 2 entire Jackpots. Over the course of 4 weeks, we had to make a bunch of simple design considerations to help cut cost. One of the main issues we had was figuring out some type of self-rider, some type of weapon system. We ended up doing no tension system or anything. We ended up calculating the exact distance it needed to be, so we didn't have to worry about that as a failure point or something that would be more cost effective. We also ended up designing the whole robot to be laser cut and welded together, which that process took about one afternoon to have a Jackpot go from a flat rate box to an assembled robot. Everything else, which is very simple, off-the-shelf parts, such as bushings instead of bearings, so we have less failure points there. We had no gearboxes. We did a straight chain reduction off of cheap motors that we found. But all in all, that was what really kept the cost down on Jackpot. Some of the unique things about Jackpot was its really fast build time, and especially with how cheap we were able to do it for such a short notice. Jackpot was mostly welded together out of plate steel, cut by Sencut Send. It went together in about a day once we had the parts in hand. All the programming stuff was very simple, off-the-shelf components. We used VESC 4112, or VESC 412s, which, there are people think, oh, that's like a 30-pound ESC, but no, it worked great for Jackpot. We used 6384 mystery brushless motors that we found on eBay. Those were about $40 a piece. Considering the VESC was only $50 a piece, that brought our entire drive system under like $800 with lipos, switches, wiring, and everything. The other really fun fact is how much glitter we ended up purchasing over the course of the 2 weeks of filming. I think that was the most parts we bought for Jackpot over that weekend was glitter rather than actual bot parts.
In our second deep dive segment, we're going to talk to Will Bales from Hypershock, who we have in our studio today. And Will, I just got to say, Hypershock looks incredible this year. You really outdid yourself with the design.
Aw, thanks, buddy.
But it seems like you had some issues getting it working before your first fight.
Getting it done, actually.
Getting it done. So can you walk us through basically, your timeline? The whole show was delayed due to COVID, and how did that affect your timeline and up to the event?
Okay, so timeline. Let's start in January. So early-ish, mid-January, we found out that BattleBots Season 5 was approved and happening, and it was announced by BattleBots and Discovery. Sometime towards the end of February and early March, we were seeing that the global landscape was starting to change because of all the COVID stuff happening. It wasn't just China, it wasn't just Italy anymore. It was starting to go places, and it was no longer outside of the US. So there was definitely some concern that the event was going to be postponed or canceled or something. Meanwhile, the robot is not totally designed. The CNC components, all the machine parts, were basically designed with the exception of the self-rider system. And so Colin, one of our new teammates who's incredible, took that on as his challenge. So he started making parts as fast as he could. And then in the middle of March, when BattleBots stopped and they finally said, all right, we're postponing, we stopped everything. Everyone just kind of took a break because we're all wiped out. Because we're working effectively a second job every night, going to bed at 3 in the morning after spending 8-10 hours here in the shop trying to design a robot that doesn't exist yet. So, and then over the summer, June through the end of August, early September actually, I was out of the country. I was in Denmark. So when filming did start up again, I was designing the robot and finishing the rest of the chassis and the armor on my laptop in a hotel room, and like trying to send pictures and screenshots and stuff to teammates to make sure we're all on the same page.
So on the episode, they made it seem like you almost didn't get into your first match. Is that just TV drama, or was it really that close this time?
That's true. So we actually got into the box twice. We also had another snag going there, which was in typical Hypershock fashion, we were doing things until the last minute here. So I'd had just under a month from when I got back into the country on September 5th to when filming started on October 2nd. So we shipped overnight a full pallet box full of stuff the night before, on the Thursday before going to filming. So we expected, like we had done last year, that when we got there, it would be there ready for us, so we could just basically continue working, which would have been great. But, things never happen that way. So long story short, it got stuck in Memphis, so it didn't make it there Friday. And then around 5 o'clock Eastern, the shipping company we used said, there was a thing that happened, and so it didn't make it on the plane, so sorry that your urgent overnight $3,400, 1,000-pound crate of important robot parts didn't make it on the plane, so it'll be there Monday. See you later. Have a good weekend. And we're like, starting to panic. And Gary, another awesome team member that we actually stole from Rotator, tracked it down. Turns out it was in a locked warehouse in Compton. So early Saturday morning, the day after we were supposed to have it, Gary and I drove down there. We met a third-party guy who put it in a tiny little truck and drove it to filming. So we finally got all our parts, but that was like all the armor, 2 of the 3 chassis, most of the internals, all the electronics. Like, we couldn't have done anything. We were basically just sitting there kind of setting up our pit, waiting for these parts to arrive. So yeah, we started off behind the 8 ball anyway, and then there was a shipping snafu. And so we were, and the last thing, I almost forgot, Tyler, he's been my best friend since we were 10 years old, and we built robots together from 12 years old or 10 years old all the way to now, so over 15 years. He broke his ankle the week before we were supposed to be at BattleBots. So instead of getting on an airplane with us on Friday morning, he was going into surgery to go fix his ankle. So he missed filming. And that meant that the guy who designed the self-rider, amazing, beautiful mechanism, and was in charge of all the electronics, all of a sudden wasn't there for us. So I was running double duty trying to get all the electronics together. And so it's safe to say that we were not running on all cylinders.
So this is all leading up to the fight. So tell us actually what happened. It looked like Hypershock had some jittery drive issues at the beginning, but everything seemed to be working more or less. Can you kind of go into some detail?
Yeah, it's a weird fight to be at the end of because everything was mostly okay at the end. We were going into it knowing we had a little bit of tuning issues with the brushless motors. We were incorporating sensors with custom sensor cables and a whole bunch of stuff this year. And because Tyler wasn't there, we just didn't have the time, manpower to really tune it and get it all dialed in. So we were running not perfect, 70%, let's say, electronically, software-wise anyway. So going into it, and we see at the very beginning when we're like moving to the opening square, I'm having a hard time turning. And it's basically because I can't break traction. The tires are so sticky, and we were having these little minute issues with the tuning parameters that I had to kind of jolt the robot in a forward direction, then I could break traction and I could do donuts all without a problem. And so that was kind of a driving challenge throughout the match. The other problem we had was this is the first time we've had a whole bunch of chain on the robot. So the first stage of the drivetrain reduction and the weapon drive is all chain driven. And that's the day that we'll learn that, yeah, you do in fact need chain tensioners, because by the end of the fight, all the chains were off the sprockets. All the motors were fine. As far as we can tell, the smoke may have been from the clutch on the weapon system, but we put the chains back on after the event, or after the fight, and it worked just fine. So it was frustrating to lose that way, and we got a little bit of singeing on our stickers here, but for the most part, you never want to lose, but as far as ways to lose to Gruff, it could have been worse.
So at the end of this match, we see you just sit down on the floor and beg for a nap. Obviously, you had some changes, like you just mentioned, you wanted to make to the robot. How long did you actually nap before you started working on the robot again?
Kyle, did I get to nap? No. Okay, so no, I didn't get to nap.
Well, let's talk about our next fight.
Yeah, Rotator Beta. I happen to have some very strong opinions on the matter, as you may or may not have seen in the episode, but I think Victor's far better equipped to talk about it himself.
So my facial reactions were pretty true. If you're looking at the show, when we were lined up there waiting for the judge's decision and we hear it's a split decision, I was a little bit surprised because in my mind, even though they were able to push us around, you don't get a lot of points by pushing other robots around. That's not what BattleBots is about. We prevented them from firing their hammer, which is part of the strategy. And to me, that was a big deal because there is an active weapon rule in BattleBots. You can't gain all the aggression points if you never use your weapon, especially if you have the ability to use your weapon. And we tore off the hammer at the end, which, one of the best things you can do in a fight is tear off the most iconic part of a robot. So tearing off the hammer off a Beta is fantastic. To me, that's like cutting off the tail off of Scorpios, which was, as soon as that happened, we knew that was a big deal. So then when Farouk announced Beta being the winner, you could tell that we were surprised, and John and Gabriel were also surprised. They didn't expect to win that one.
For your winner, Beta!
It kind of went against everything that we felt was in the spirit of BattleBots, because at least in my end, because we do know that for BattleBots, they place damage as the highest weight with 5 points. Control, I would say, yeah, that's fine. Give Beta all the control points. Rotator's not really a control robot. Horizontal spinners rarely are. We did have the wedgelets or the fingers in the back, but they weren't working as good as I wanted them to. I think with that, if they were working 100%, we could have actually maybe split control points. I don't know in favor of who more, but we would have been able to push Beta around instead of having them push us around. Aggression couldn't have been 3-0 in favor of Beta because they never fired their hammer. That's part of the rules. And then damage would have been, or should have been, 5 points for Rotator. So if you give us 5 points, at least one aggression point, that's a win right there. So that's why I was disappointed, because the rules are pretty clear about that. And having rewarded Beta damage points when they really didn't do any damage, pushing into the walls, doesn't reduce the effectiveness of Rotator, especially not this year. That's why I put such a big emphasis on improving the durability and the reliability of Rotator, because you don't want to get damaged by getting pushed into the wall. So I think we had some scratches in the paint on the side, maybe. Nothing really. So Rotator was 100%. Beta was lacking their hammer. They never fired their weapon. So in my mind, it was a clear win for Rotator if you're familiar with the rules. So I've seen a lot of the comments online, and a lot of those comments are based off of emotion, but you have to play by the rules. This is a show, and this is also a tournament. We have rules for a reason, and if it would have been judged by the rules, Rotator should have won.
Sorry, judges, I think you got it wrong.
Last year, you could see that we had a lot of issues with our bars breaking, and we never really got a good chance to learn too much about our new weapon setup. So last year, we actually increased the weapon power on Rotator by 200%, or we doubled it. So then this year, I switched over to AR500 finally. I had been using S7 last year. I heard such good things about it, and I hadn't seen any robot with an AR500 blade actually have their weapon break up to this point. So decided to try it out this year. Other than that, it's essentially the same exact drivetrain from last year, or the weapon drivetrain, where it's a dual brushless motor setup. Each one is about 10 kilowatts, and then we have a V-belt, a single V-belt, running the whole blade. And we actually upped the weapon again this year through more optimization on the design. We went up from 40 pounds to now a 50-pound blade. We do have a double disc design for this year. The configuration is a separate module that bolts onto the back of Rotator. The only downside, even though we have it, is that we've spent a lot of weight optimizing the reliability and the durability of Rotator. So there's a lot less weight now for weapons when we go with a dual disc setup. So each disc for the dual disc setup weighs a little less than 25 pounds, which isn't great when it comes to kinetic energy. We're still running at the 250 mile per hour speed limit, but now, it's literally half the kinetic energy than if we were to go with a 50-pound bar. And the reason we didn't go with a double disc setup for Beta was because in order to get a decent sized disc, we have to put a lot of holes in it. And being that Beta's a hammer bot, we were really concerned about the damage they can cause if they fired the hammer into the center of the disc and through the holes and got right to the framer and some of the internals. So the 50-pound bar was solid. It's better to act as a shield, 250 mile per hour shield. And then we had additional armor on top of that, or on the exposed portions of the frame. So that was, in my mind, the safest bet to protect ourselves while still being offensive.
On this week's Chris Roast, I feel like Chris was just out to get me because he lobs this one up and then Sam slams it on my face.
Sam McAmis of Team Gruff. What's cooking?
Hypershock?
Yeah.
We've been having a lot of fun with our Chris Roast of the night, and we've been pretty hard on Chris. So we figured we should invite him on the show and get his take on it.
Hi, Chris.
So Chris, obviously the first question is, how much do you love our Chris Roast segment?
Can I tell you what an honor it is to have a segment named after you? And by the way, do we have to change the animation of that thing now that I've got a beard? Don't worry, I'll take care of the bill if you have to build a new one. Anyway, I just love the segment. I have made my career over 25 years of being a little bit snarky, and I apologize for that if it offends anybody. I don't try to be really mean, really mean, as Mike likes to say. I just like to have fun, sometimes at other people's expense.
Before we started doing this Chris Rose segment, had you ever gotten in trouble for anything you've said on the show?
Fortunately, I have never gotten in trouble for anything I have actually said on BattleBots. The cool thing is, Kenny and I are sitting boxside, and we're calling all the fights as live, if you will. So they try and keep as much of those fights as possible. But they do go into edit. So we have a great production staff behind the scenes, led by Chris Cowan and Aaron Catling, and a whole host of producers and editors that will make sure that when Chris Rose says something moronic, which happens about every 3 minutes at BattleBots, that it doesn't actually make air. So they're the last line of defense, and for that, I want to thank them.
And Chris, how did you end up on BattleBots?
Kind of a cool story here. They were still looking for a play-by-play person in 2015 before they reincarnated BattleBots on ABC. And I would say 2 weeks before the launch of the show, they brought me in. They talked to me. They were familiar with me because Chris Cowan and Aaron Catling, who are two of the EPs on the show, are huge sports fans. And so that certainly helped. But I think the guy that was certainly in my corner the most is a producer named Mike Burks, who has produced everything over the years at CBS Sports and Fox Sports, from the Olympics to football. And Mike and I had worked on college football before at Fox Sports, and he was like, listen, use this guy. He's got the right tone, the right energy. And I am oh so thankful to all those people because it has been a great fit, and I love calling BattleBots. And I hope that everybody knows out there that when you see me and Kenny and we're as enthusiastic out there bouncing up and down in our seats, that's not fake. That's real stuff. We are super excited because we too are BattleBots fans.
And I've got to know, what is in that binder on your table?
What do you know, Chris? What have you seen?
I think they're recipes, honestly.
I like to imagine there's just doodles of all the robots.
I think it's blackmail, personally.
I think it's blank pages.
So you want to see what's inside of Chris Rose's binder? Come on, let's take a class field trip, shall we? So here's the Chris Rose BattleBots binder. It's got a lot of stuff in here, like a map of the pit area and the arena, and then you get a lot of cool stuff. Oh, on some builders, like there's Ray Billings and Tombstone, and a lot of notes, and you could flip through even more, and you might even find something on, oh, Witch Doctor. Look at this. Andrea and Mike Delately. How cute is this photo, huh? It's like a prom picture. We got some notes here. This marks the 10th year anniversary of Witch Doctor bot theme. It can sprint across the arena in 2 seconds. Also, the weapon speed is faster than the Category 5 Hurricanes. So a lot of little notes to get you started for the season. But really where I get the most information is when I sit down and talk to the bot builders before the season starts. And then as the season progresses, before each big fight, we will have a chat with them. Just see where they are mentally, emotionally, how the bot is doing, because the narrative changes throughout the season. But that's what's inside of Chris Rose's BattleBots folder. You too can order one for the holidays. Operators are standing by.
Now it's time for this week's fan question from Behind the Bots.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Chris, from Behind the Bots, the podcast that asks fan questions to the builders with their own vlogcast. This week's hottest fan question is sent in from Cybershock builder Ty Little and several other listeners who ask,
How does a flamethrower like Gruff's work?
Oh, why don't you just throw the technical T-Rex?
I mean, that's what I was going to say, so let's do that.
Oh,
Technical T-Rex, technical T-Rex. The T in T-Rex stands for technical.
A flamethrower requires a few basic elements to work. First, you need a pressurized fuel source, such as propane or butane, for example. Next, in order to ignite the fuel, you need an ignition source. The two most common ignition types at BattleBots are furnace igniters or high-voltage sparkers, like a taser. A remote-controlled application, like BattleBots, requires additional electronics. The fuel source is turned on and off via a solenoid valve,
and the ignition source is controlled via a relay. In order to have a proper combustion of the fuel, you need the proper air-to-fuel ratio. The most common way to achieve this is to incorporate a shroud around the nozzle and ignition source. If there is too much fuel, the flame will not ignite, and if there is not enough fuel, it will burn too quickly and snuff itself out. Many variables affect the performance of the flamethrower, including tank volume, tubing diameter and length, as well as nozzle and shroud geometry. So each system is uniquely designed for each robot. Propane-powered flamethrowers, like Gruff's, result in a much hotter flame that is more bluish in color. Butane-powered systems usually result in a larger yellowish ball of fire, which has less velocity but looks more spectacular. Some teams have even implemented colored fire by adding chemicals to the fuel source.
Tonight's Thing of the Week is Judge's Decision of the Week. That's quite a coincidence on our randomizer there.
Who makes the graphic?
All right, I'm taking this one. Okay, so obviously I have a certain thing I wanted to talk about, clearly the Beta Rotator match, and I had a couple words to say about it in the episode. Before we get into it, a little bit of context. So BattleBots is a show we're filming, and accommodations are made based on what's practical. So for example, Beta actually wasn't at filming. They were still quarantining from entering the US as of, I think, Monday and Tuesday of filming. So their first fight against Rotator wasn't until Wednesday, which in the context of this conversation was after some other stuff had happened. So, Kraken, Black Dragon had happened, Witch Doctor Hydra had happened, some other fights that were a little iffy had happened, but it was mostly okay. And then there were some other things that you haven't seen yet that kind of pushed this frustration in the builder group kind of to a crescendo. So when they filmed us talking about this Beta Rotator fight, it was the culmination of a lot of frustration right at the beginning of the event. And so I think it's important to frame this context with that in mind. It wasn't just this fight.
Yeah, I mean, even for our own fights, we really rely on trying to guess how the judges are going to judge a certain match. Last week we talked about how we kept our weapon spinning even though it was broken and not letting us drive well, because we've been used to, if your active weapon is not in use and it's not working, you're going to lose that judge's decision. So we actively gave up control for that. So now to see Beta win a match without using its hammer once makes us question our decisions in the match.
Yeah, something that's different for this year is there's a lot of TVs in the pit area around all the builders because of all these COVID protocols. So we're actually able to watch a lot more matches this year than we ever have in the past. So like Andrea said, we're watching these matches and watching the judges' calls to see kind of what values more damage, control, aggression, etc. And with these inconsistent calls, basically what's happening is we're changing our technique of how we're going to perform in a match, and if we're going to turn the weapon off or try to push the robot under the arena hazards or whatever. So basically seeing these judges' calls is what's giving us the feedback on how to perform in our matches.
And it's important to point out, and I've tried to be a judge at small events. It's hard. It's a thankless job, I know, and it's subjective. Ultimately, you're looking at your peers' robots and deciding which one won.
Well, one thing we haven't talked about too is that they actually changed the judging criteria, like we heard in our last episode from Greg Munson, to weigh damage more heavily. So I think in last year's judging criteria, I would have given this to Rotator. Even more so with this year's judging criteria, where damage is 5 points versus just 3 for aggression and damage.
The ultimate problem I have here is enforcement with consistency. Because if you don't enforce these rules and your judging criteria consistently, then you have a fight like Kraken versus Black Dragon, who, if you kind of took these rules and this mindset from the Beta Rotator fight and put it on that fight, I think Kraken would have won, and vice versa. So I'm hoping that as the season progresses that it gets a little bit better. But as we've all learned, don't let it go to the judges, ever. All right, that's our show. Watch us next week. But before we go, you just take a moment, take your hat off. Just watch this sad montage of broken robots. My active weapon is Snark.
Cameras.
I'm also recording.
I was on the other side of the shot.
Well, microphone, shirt.
Chest hair. Exposed.
I don't know why yours likes to do that.
Because it's attracted to his chest hair, obviously.
Techno T-Rex, Techno T-Rex, the TNT Rex stands for technical.
Oh, man, I love Technical T-Rex.